While we wait, I'm just going to test out the screen sharing.
Sure. Yeah, it's visible.
Okay, great.
Mohit, maybe we can start. It's 10:05.
Right, sir. So, good morning and welcome all to the sixth talk and the series of the White Coat and Other Stories. Today, as a speaker, we have with us Dr. Naman Shah, and I take privilege in introducing him to the audience. He was born and brought up in the United States. He trained as an NIH-supported physician-scientist with an MD in family medicine, followed by a PhD in infectious disease epidemiology. He has his work scattered across the United States and India from last 14 years. It's a long period. So he's working both in the US and India. That started from something like polio eradication activities in rural UP. Finally, after working for like 14 years here and there, he finally shifted his base to India 1.5 years back. And he now works with Jan Swasthya Sahyog in rural Chhattisgarh. He has a wide variety of clinical work there, including critical care, high-risk obstetrics, and general surgery. He has recently been drafted as a member of working group of the National COVID-19 Task Force. So he will share his story and he will share some lessons learned along the way he traveled. So welcome, Dr. Naman, and it's all yours.
Thank you. Everyone should also just please call me Naman. So here's what I was going to propose. If there's any feedback, I'm happy to change it. But I thought I would just share a little bit of my story for about 10, 15 minutes. I have a short presentation, which will take another 15, 20 minutes, and then leave a good amount of time for more interaction and question and answers. Is that okay?
Fine.
Okay. So first, yeah, I would love to thank the organizers. I've been in touch with Aditi and Mohit, and really appreciate you guys putting this together. Hats off to the students who started this, and special thanks to Hariom and his friends who visited JSS and I think asked me to consider speaking. It's a privilege to be with all of you all here today. So I think Mohit gave a bit of an introduction. I'll go into a few more details of some of the specifics. So I wanted to talk about how I got involved in polio eradication. In the US, you don't go straight from secondary school to medical school. You do an undergraduate degree first. And I did my Bachelor of Science in public health, actually, at a state school in the US. And during our graduation, one of the speakers was David Heyman, who used to be in charge of polio eradication for WHO. And I worked doing part-time research in a malaria lab at that time. And he came to visit the lab members because he used to do malaria research himself. And he spoke with everyone from the lowliest undergraduate to the principal scientist, and asked people what their interests were, what they were working on. And when I told him I would love to contribute to public health in India and public health in general, he said, I'm going to give you the best advice of your life. Don't go straight to medical school. Come experience polio eradication and learn from it. My generation of public health leaders learned in smallpox, and you should experience polio before it's eradicated, which will be soon. Now, this was 2006, and it took many, many years afterwards, so his estimate was a bit off the mark, but I think the advice was sound. There was no specific program, there were no applications, so even though I believed in what he was saying, I had no idea of how to proceed, how to come to India and get involved. And I think this is one lesson sort of the story, which is going to be about chance. And the second lesson is about privilege. So I emailed him later on saying, look, I believe you, but how do I do this? Can you please help me? And, I think that was it was a risky proposition, right? There's no funding necessary. There's no structure. There's no guaranteed outcome. There is not a lot of support. It was sort of just trying something on my own. But what he said made sense, and I had been, as an American-born confused desi, I wanted to come back to India as an adult and work there professionally, and see where that led me in terms of my sense of purpose in this world and sense of belonging. So he connected me with Dr. Deshpande, who was the head of the Enterovirus Research Center, which is India's globally certified reference polio lab in Mumbai. And I then connected with the local Rotary Club. And for those of you who don't know, Rotary was a big funder of polio eradication, and there's active Rotarians across India as well. And the Rotary Club agreed to pay for my airfare. So I landed in Mumbai and went to go meet Dr. Deshpande to find out that the lab had burned down a week ago. The AC caught on fire and the entire building burnt. So now I was in India with plans to be here for a year or several years with nothing to do. Dr. Deshpande kindly connected me to Dr. Sunil Bell, who was at the National Polio Surveillance Project, who said, actually, we have a shortage of field staff. You have a public health background. You speak, Hindi, thoda sa kacha, lekin zyada dikkat nahi. And we'll use you and send you to help with supplementary immunization activities in UP. And that's how I ended up there, and it was life-changing for me. Before that, I had done a little bit of lab research. I thought I would go to medical school. At the most, I would work on some biomarkers, and otherwise have a fairly more standard career. But working in the field, I ended up in Western UP in JP Nagar district. And in 2006 was an epidemic year for India, where cases doubled compared to the previous year. And JP Nagar had 21 wild polio virus cases, the second highest in the country. And it was a life-changing experience. The local surveillance medical officer there became friends, and we divided up the work. And that was really my introduction to public health. The two lessons I take away from this, one is I was incredibly privileged to do this. It took some proactive work on my end, and it took some risk, but I think we have to recognize that non-traditional paths are really, really benefited by privilege. And there are two separate types of privilege. One is a sort of a social material privilege where I didn't need to earn. My family did not rely on me for support. If the plan didn't work out, I could count on their support for me. And the second form of privilege, which we don't often think about, but which is just as important, is a psychological security. that when you try something a little risky and it doesn't work out, that can be really damaging to the ego and to our sense of self. And I came from a secure background where I had had a lot of opportunities, and so that psychological risk was also low. The second lesson from that for me was a lesson about chance. It was really chance that David Heyman happened to be our graduation speaker that year. It was chance that the National Polio Lab burned down, and I arrived in public health, through this chance. Later on, after I'd spoken to a lot of different people who are further along in their careers in public health, everyone had a similar story. Very few people set out along this pathway, and some accidental turn in one place or another sort of changed the direction of their lives. And what I take away from that is to be open to chance. My favorite quote about chance is actually from Louis Pasteur, the famous French microbiologist, who said, "Chance favors the prepared mind." And I think this captures sort of both of the key aspects of chance, that you have to be open to it, but you also have to be prepared for it. Chance alone is not enough. Preparations alone are not enough. After my year working in the field in polio, I started my MD PhD program. This is a wonderful initiative by the National Institutes of Health, which 50 years ago decided that we needed translational leaders. And what they meant by translational leaders in medicine were people who understood the science, the PhD side, and people who understood clinical needs, the MD side. And that by having at least a small set of people who are trained as physician scientists, they could accelerate the progress of work from the bench to the bedside. My interest in translational science was at a public health level, which is a new type of translation which is being recognized, which is the idea of taking, bedside innovations and translating them to the population and the community. This is sort of built upon the work that studies the no-do gap, that we already know a lot more than we do, and translating that is a form of innovation. So as a very simple example, JNC8 guidelines for hypertension have been out for many years at this point. Probably only 50% of patients who are being treated for hypertension are actually being treated by evidence-based guidelines. So by doing my PhD in epidemiology, I was hoping to sort of bridge that second level of translational work. After my MD PhD, I had to decide on residencies. And for a long time, I did infectious disease epidemiology. I thought I would just do medicine and possibly an ID fellowship and just have, a straightforward career. When I actually went and did my last 2 years of medical school in the US, which are clinical years, I realized I loved everything. And what I liked in ID was a lot more of tropical ID, the type of work that's done in India, compared to a lot of US ID is nosocomial infections and transplant infections, which I did not enjoy that much clinically. And what I really enjoyed clinically was acute care. I loved critical care. I loved general surgery. And in the end, I was attracted to broad-based training. And for me, the two broadest fields in medicine were family medicine and general surgery. And this leads to the next lesson, which is a lesson about stories. Even though this was my experience and I really enjoyed these things, I sort of wrote them off. And I wrote them off because I had a story that, hey, I'm a public health guy. I'm going to work towards building public health institutions. I'm working on communicable disease control. It doesn't make sense to do surgery. And this was almost an efficiency argument, an argument towards going on a linear path. And it highlights both the strength and the downside of stories. So we live in a complex world, right? There's analysis paralysis. You have so many opportunities available to you, so many different potential choices to make. So stories are useful in that stories simplify life, and they can help you move forward. At the same time, when our experiences vary and when new opportunities come up, stories can also become constricting if you stay stuck to a preformed story. After grappling with that decision, I ultimately chose family medicine for a variety of reasons. and have not regretted it. Have loved family medicine, and specifically did a form of family medicine that I trained at a district hospital at one of the oldest family medicine programs in the US. And the entire 100-bed hospital plus the community clinics were run only by family medicine physicians, including every department. And that was a really wonderful way to train, especially for general practice, because every department was committed to teaching you, and you could learn whatever you wanted to. So two further synopsis and lessons here. One was, when choosing family medicine, my biggest barrier was actually this idea of prestige. And in the US and in India as well, family medicine is not considered prestigious. You know, I came from a top medical school. I trained as an MD, PhD. My program director was like, why are you doing family medicine? Why are you doing family medicine at a district hospital? At least do it at some respectable academic institute. And I would be honest that this did affect me. The opinion of my peers, the opinion of my faculty, and it's a very human reaction. And I don't think we should, necessarily be ashamed of it. At the same time, it is important to look into deeper and question. Ultimately, I think being able to walk away from this notion of what is prestigious made me happier and more fulfilled, and has led me to have a more interesting career. Prestige is real, and many of you, especially at an elite institution like AIIMS, when you're deciding on your next steps, will find conflicts between what you might feel compelled to do, what you might be interested in doing, and social pressures from family, from peers, from faculty around prestige. And then the last thing I'll talk about the last two things I'll talk about in my story are family medicine and JSS. So I wanted to spend a few minutes to talk about family medicine because I don't think people are necessarily exposed to family medicine well. First is, I think AIIMS has done a tremendous disservice by combining community medicine and family medicine. To me, these are two very different areas of medicine. Community medicine is much more in the vein of public health and concerned with populations, and family medicine is really a clinical specialty. Family medicine started as a specialty, although as a concept, it's much older and not unique to any country, but as a specialty emerged in the US in the 1970s as sort of a counter-revolution to the increased specialization and compartmentalization of medicine, which was happening at that time. Family medicine is unique in medicine in that it's the only specialty which is based off of philosophy, right? It's not based off any age, organ system, gender, or mode of intervention. It is a philosophy which says, which is based off of 3 C's: comprehensiveness, continuity of care, and care in the context of family. Where I trained, I would say that family medicine also had the philosophy of being trained as a broad-based generalist, and a generalist who could undertake whatever needs their community had of them. I had faculty members who started out in their career doing general surgery where there wasn't a surgeon, or providing anesthesia care where there was no anesthetist, in addition to doing general family practice clinic, towards everything from addiction medicine to high-risk prenatal care to whatever you can think of. We had one family medicine physician who, when our district hospital could not find a neurologist for many years, she taught herself neurology, relied on her neurology colleagues, and then has been doing a neurology clinic in addition for the last 20 years. So that was a tremendous example and role model and lesson about sort of health systems in addition to clinical training. How I ended up at JSS. I met Yogesh Jain, who was one of the founders of JSS, at a conference. We hit it off. Another chance moment, another accident. And I said, this is someone I want to come learn from at some point in my life. And that was it. And then that was in 2012. And finally, 7 years later, I made that dream come true. What is special about JSS is in 15 years of working with different organizations in medicine, everything from local health departments to the WHO, everything from local community clinics to tertiary academic centers. I have found that organizations fall on one of two ends of the spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, you have very intellectual, very rigorous, strong work from academic tertiary institutes, much like AIIMS. The downside of these places is they're often, to one degree or another, disconnected from larger problems. In fact, I've heard from many people, and this has been my experience as well, that one of the limitations of policy making in India is that policies get made in Delhi, and they largely get made by people who live in Delhi, including many AIIMS faculty, who are brilliant and wonderful and very smart, but are more limited in their experiences. And on the other end of the spectrum in medicine, you have community-based organizations which are in the thick of it, which are getting their hands dirty every day, which have a wider variety of lived experiences, but they don't always have the frameworks necessary to translate their experiences into larger lessons or the language to participate in sort of these larger policy dialogues. JSS is Republic of Ansari Nagar. Yes, I've heard that too. That's really funny. So they don't always have the ability to then participate in these larger dialogues. JSS to me was unique in that it was squarely at the intersection of these two extremes. It did wonderful intellectual, rigorous work, and was based in a wider set, a richer set of lived experiences. So that was why I ended up at JSS. So that is all I have for my story, and I'm happy to take questions about it now or at the end, and then I can move on to my presentation. Maybe the organizers can chip in. Should we do a few question answers now, or should we just wait till the end?
So I think we wait till the end and you can start with your presentations now.
Okay, great. I was hoping a little bit for a break from speaking. It's I like more back and forth than a monologue, but TK.
Hey Naman, you can actually look at some of the questions there. I mean, a couple of people have asked, I think.
Oh, okay.
Asha, you already responded to the Republic of Ansari Nagar.
Yes. That's all I can see in the chat. Any other questions?
So are there any questions as of now?
Okay, I will go ahead and move on to my slides. They hopefully will not take too long. So I originally made this talk when I was graduating from my MD PhD program and have modified it since. My director, Dr. Oringer, who was a wonderful man and did some of the original clinical trials for hydroxyurea for sickle cell disease, actually, asked me before I graduated that, hey, Naman, you've always been a bit of a strange one. I want you to give a talk on something different. make it broader than science. So this is a little bit of what I came up with, and it's been based on my own experiences on barriers I faced in broadly trying to make a difference. So I don't have any disclaimers other than I'm still figuring this out. Okay. So let me see. Let me just move my frames around a little bit. Okay. So why this talk? Well, I think what we do in science and medicine is not objective. Our actions in these realms are normative. What I mean by normative is that it is based on, values. It is everything we do in science, from the questions we ask to how we study those questions to how we interpret the answers, has to do with underlying values. We may not make those values clear, but they are there. And I think we benefit from making these value frameworks explicit. Another way to think about this is sort of Bayesian reasoning. I don't know if you come across Bayesian reasoning as part of your training in clinical reasoning and use of diagnostics. but it's very helpful there, and it's very helpful philosophically. One of the it actually there's a lot of ancient sort of religious concepts that have to do with Bayesian thinking and Bayesian reality, especially in Jainism and Buddhism. And Amartya Sen has written about this, and he calls it positional objectivity, which is this, sorry for all the jargon, but a lot of fancy language to just say that the world looks different depending on where you're standing. So for example, the problem of malaria looks very different from sitting in Delhi versus the problem of malaria looks very different from a village in rural Orissa. And both of those, in a way are objective, but again, depends on where you're standing. Another common example of Bayesian reasoning and perspective is the famous story of the three blind men. They all feel an elephant, and each of them describe a different part. Each of them are true, but they're only a perspective of the truth, and they depended on where you're starting. Okay, sorry, that was a bit of a tangent. So premise one in my argument about making a difference is that making a difference, let's define it. So it just means caring about something larger than yourself. Also, that it is worthwhile, and it's more so than the alternative. This is my premise. You can argue with this premise, but the rest of my argument is based on this premise. And two is that there are many ways of doing so. There's not one way to make a difference. Making, each of these words also has important implications. Making implies to me a deliberate effort, that it's not done accidentally. That when I talk about alternatives, that the alternatives mean seeking personal gains and personal returns. And by many ways of doing so, there is clinical medicine, which improves individual human well-being. There's science, which advances our understanding of our world and our life. There's just nurturing communities, many different ways of making a difference. I would say that even having this group amongst yourself, encouraging others, questioning is a form of making a difference. My second premise is that all of you who are listening are committed to making a difference. By being part of this group, you've indicated that already. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. If your goals were only personal, there would be much better ways to spend your time. Premise three is wanting to make a difference does not necessarily lead to doing so, right? Intention does not end up in outcome. And answering why is that and what we can do about it can help us make a difference. Premise four is most of what I say you already know. Clinical practice and research involves a lot of thought and introspection, so these points might be fairly obvious. There are things you've necessarily thought about before, but again, knowing doesn't necessarily lead to practice. And why might that be? So there are, I found that barriers come in two forms. One are internal barriers, and the second is external barriers. The internal barriers is often our mindset and our psychology, and the two are there's not necessarily a clear distinction between the two. Our external world influences our psychology. Our psychology creates the external world we live in. But we have to face both ourselves, our impulses, and understand the world around us. There are traps, and I'm going to discuss a few barriers in no particular order. I apologize, by the way, I have a tendency of speaking fast. And so if I need to slow down, please, somebody let me know. So barrier one. One is we think about values as innate character traits, that somebody has a value or they don't have that value. Somebody is kind or they're not kind. And I think this leads to their underdevelopment. Values are, to me, I've learned, better thought about as skills. And just like any other skill, they can be learned and they have to be practiced. And trying to be professionally and personally consistent is the best form of practice. That if you're going to be working on issues concerning the well-being of others, then being kind to individuals in your day-to-day life, is consistent. So most of our defaults, for example, are not often the values that we would choose. In the sense of, in academics, especially in science, one default is critical thinking. You know, that in Journal Club, when we look at a study, we see what's wrong with the study, we think of what could be better, but we don't necessarily do the opposite very well. We don't often do appreciative thinking. What did the authors do well? What is there to appreciate in the study in spite of the flaws? And so, you know, that leads to sort of the maxim that it's easier to be clever than it is to be kind. We also often separate this world of professional and personal, that, you know, somebody might work on environmental issues, but be very environmentally irresponsible in their personal life, and that's okay. I think actually one of the strengths of India is we appreciate people who are personally and professionally consistent. That was one of Gandhi's big strengths. And I will say that, you know, for all the problems in policymaking in India, the fact that you know, many community groups, many groups like JSS, which at times might be critical of the government, are still involved in various policy processes, is something that's relatively unique compared to the US. But the importance of walking the talk. Barrier number 2. This is a psychological thing that is well known. We overweight negative experiences. And by overweighting negative experiences, we avoid risk, we work in silos, and we work in secrecy. This is just a well-studied, well-known cognitive bias. If you are aware of it, you can avoid it. My premise is that openness is always a net positive in the long run. Make it a value, practice it, live it. Everyone has a story about being wronged. Somebody stole your idea, somebody critiqued you on something you shared with them. It hurts, it burns, it leaves a mark. But if you let it influence your future decision-making, if you let it influence your behavior, you lose out. For all the negative experiences where we were hurt, those stick in our mind. But the positive experiences from being open, we often discount. You know, we forget about them, or we don't weigh them appropriately. Think about all the times you shared something with somebody. Think about all the times you connected somebody to an idea, a contact, a resource. Think about all the times, you know, we went out of our way. We often don't realize the benefits that has had, not only for the other person, but even for ourselves. In clinical medicine, this is called the Igbo trap. I got burned once trap. You know, ek baar maine ye dawai diya, or, you know, patient ko nukshan hua, I will never give that medicine again, right? That's a clear cognitive bias, that because you had the 1 in 1,000 side effect, you stop using a medicine, which the other 999 times is a wonderful, beneficial medicine. So in the same way that happens in clinical medicine, this happens in life. We overweigh negative experiences, and this is a hard problem. This requires constant vigilance, but openness is I think critical to making a difference. Barrier 3, Paul Farmer from Partners in Health talks about this a lot, and that is we have socialized scarcity. And what I mean by this is scarcity, which can be a scarcity of resources, it can be a scarcity of time, it can be a scarcity of opportunities, is both a reality and perception. Yes, we only have 24 hours in a day. But when we think we're busy, there's an element of this which is physical, that there is a shortage of time. And there's simultaneously an element of it which is perceptual, that what somebody might be asking us to help with only takes 5 minutes, and we actually do have those 5 minutes. This mindset of scarcity leads to competition that is unnecessary, and compromises, which are also unnecessary and unhealthy. Scarcity works at the individual level, and it works at the policy level. I will say at the policy level, one way scarcity has harmed public health is we'll say, well, you know, we're a poor country, we cannot afford to spend more on health. We're a poor country, we cannot afford to treat this disease. We're a poor country, we cannot afford this better medication. There is both, again, reality to it and a perception to it. There is a reality in that there are a fixed amount of resources, but it is also not a true reality, right? We have so much tax avoidance. So at the same time, there's a fixed amount of resources, yet we let so many resources go. There's at the same time where we say there's not enough money for health, we spend, crores and crores and crores on advanced defense technology. That maybe that's necessary, but maybe that's also an area where we can question our priorities, right? So scarcity at the individual level, scarcity at a social level. If you realize that it is both perceptual as well as based in physical attributes, you can do a better job on dealing with the perceptual aspects of it. At the individual level, for example, I've seen, when a professor gives time to students. Now, AIIMS professors must be some of the busiest faculty in the world, right? Huge clinical burden, research demands for which no dedicated time is given, and also teaching and mentoring, which take enormous efforts of time and energy. So for the people who engage in it, hats off to you. And for people who don't, there are limits to their time, but there are also perceptual issues. And that sometimes all it takes to really motivate somebody along their way or change their life is 1 minute of kind words. And I would say even the busiest person in this world has that 1 minute. Barrier number 4, working together is hard. Most governance failures are problems of coordination. So this is again and again and again. If you look at your own life, if you look at clinical teams, and if you look at policy, management problems, coordination problems are often where the barrier is. When you do an M&M or a root cause analysis about a bad patient outcome, sometimes it's a clinical decision. Sometimes it is about medicine. More often the cause, in my experience at least, is it's been a coordination problem. Information wasn't shared. A handoff didn't happen. People didn't work together. Timing was off. Same thing in our own lives. Same thing in public health. It is really, really hard to work together. And this is not a trivial problem. The solution isn't just, well, we should work together. How do we do that? What does that take? There are psychological aspects, there are organizational aspects, there are communication skills, there are mindsets and values. A common critique of government is, well, if government was more like business, government would be more effective. But what people don't realize is governments have far more stakeholders, far more actors involved. And the challenge of government is a coordination problem, and this is not easy. What you do with this is don't discount management, think about management. One of our problems in medicine is that not that we have physicians doing management. I think physician managers are often a very good thing for technical organizations, but we don't train our physician managers. We expect physicians to do management work without any understanding of how to be a good manager and what is good management. And the second thing I'll say is a lot of coordination failures at the individual level, at the clinical level, at the public health level is related to ego. And Margaret Mead, I think, famously said, it's amazing what can be accomplished when no one cares about who takes the credit. So another maxim of this is take your work seriously, but take yourself lightly. And just keeping these lessons in mind, having an appropriate respect for management, taking it with appropriate seriousness can help us work together better. At a residency training level, for those of you who are about to enter postgraduate training, I will say that one area of postgraduate training where we can improve is realize that being trained as a physician, especially in the modern era, is far more than clinical training, right? Communication, team-based training, professionalism, these are all essential skills to being a good doctor at the end of the day. And we should really have mechanisms in postgraduate training to work on these and to assess these in trainees as well. Because, just knowing everything in Harrison's will not make you a good doctor. Barrier number 5, the tyranny of the proximal can be hard to escape. Direction can flounder in the absence of theory. This is a little bit abstract, and I apologize for that. But what I mean by it is, and this applies in our own lives, is the tyranny of the proximal can be hard to escape. Often, if we do not plan our lives, if we do not plan our days, if we do not plan our approach to a patient, we can easily get overwhelmed by what is immediate. But what is immediate is not always what's the most important. And this happens to organizations, this happens to individuals. So when organizations, a lot of times, both clinical organizations and research organizations and public health organizations in India are under-resourced. So you're often just firefighting. You're dealing up with whatever emergency has come up today. And when you do that, you address the urgent, but you're sometimes missing the important. So differentiating between urgent and non-urgent and important and not important is really important, is really critical. And that one thing that helps that is theory. Sometimes we try to poo-poo theory, that I'm a practical guy, I don't care about theory, that, theory, this is abstract, what uses it, but theory, philosophy, systems understanding, taking the long view helps us escape this trap. Otherwise, you'll find yourself reacting, and that means other people, other events are dictating your behaviors rather than responding and taking sort of measured approaches that really come from the inside and come from a more sound basis. Philosophy of science is a wonderful field. It can be difficult to access, but even understanding how science progresses, that science, the progression of science is not linear, that science is braced in social structures. To me, this has really helped me as a scientist, but there's similar versions of this in medicine and even for your own personal life. Okay, last 2 barriers, sorry. Barrier 6, we are vulnerable to the incentives of our environment. It becomes easy to conflate the means with the end and the output with the outcomes. So, a lot of times we'll hear that, the means justify the ends, but the means and ends are very different. So, our incentive, for example, in academics might be to publish, right? As in a lot of research institutions, you're judged based on publications. But is publications really the end of science? No, the end of science is the advancement of knowledge, and publications may indicate an advancement of knowledge, and many times they don't, right? They're poor quality or they're not replicable. And so the systems we live in sometimes create incentives that are actually not in line with either the aim of the system or our personal aims. And recognizing the effects of these incentives, and then as leaders, structuring the right incentives is very, very important. No matter how well-meaning I may be or how well-meaning you may be, it is very, very difficult to escape the incentives of your environment. So what can one do? You can recognize that this is a game, that the incentives are a game. That's number 1. Some people don't even get to there. Number 2, you can try to beat the game. You can publish until you advance high enough in the institution where you can change the incentives to make it better for everyone. This is certainly possible, but it's hard. One of the reasons it's hard is that the process of playing the game often changes us in the process. That after 10 years of trying to get grants and publishing for the sake of publishing, your perspective, your own values change. But again, it's one option. You can try to change the rules, or you can exit the system. You can try to find a different environment where the incentives are in line with your values or what you want to achieve. Last, systems can co-opt us. What I mean by co-option is when you are working towards a goal or towards a motivation that is someone else's, which you may not recognize, and you may not share. So many institutions do this. You start out for one reason, and they have you working towards their ends, which are a different reason. Sometimes that's okay. It's okay for it to be a different reason, but sometimes they might be things you disagree with and you just don't realize. And how do we guard against this? Usually, it's just self-assessment. Am I doing what I want to do? Am I making a difference? Am I living the values I want to live? And that is important, and we have to assess ourselves. But assessing ourselves is dangerous because we have a tendency to rationalize, and intelligent people are also really good at rationalizing to themselves. And there's confirmation bias that, once you've embarked upon a path, once you've made an investment, you tend to confirm it. You tend to say, yeah, no, I made the right choice. No, what I'm doing is making a difference. No, I have to do this, or I had to do this, and this is hard for even very skilled, very intelligent people. When you're in the halls of power, and we see this with COVID, we have very intelligent scientists saying things that are completely non-scientific, and how they rationalize it to themselves, how they confirm their actions. I think they are good people, but they cannot, even they cannot escape these tendencies. So the lesson there is external accountability is very important. You should have your values clear. You should try to self-assess well, but develop mechanisms of external accountability for yourself and institutionally. Mentors and a peer community have been invaluable for me. They question you, you trust them. They can often say difficult things that other people may not be able to say, and that's an important check. And it doesn't naturally occur. You really have to actively work to cultivate mentors, find like-minded peers, and then ask them to keep you accountable. So those are all the barriers I have. One nice approach I came across from a famous physician writer, most of you would be familiar with Atul Gawande, in his book Better, A Surgeon's Notes on Performance. He says, how can we be better in life? How can we be better as doctors? How can we be better at whatever we do? He had five recommendations. One was ask unscripted questions. 2 is don't whine, don't complain. 3 is count something. 4 is write something. And 5 is change and change often. I like these a lot. I think they're a wonderful framework for making a difference. This Rumi quote also reminds me of a lot of the psychological barriers, especially. And this is one of my favorite poems. Forget safety, live where you fear to live, destroy your reputation, be notorious. It's a little extreme. Don't take it too literally, but it's an important lesson about sometimes what is needed to break our internal and social conditioning that can keep us from making a difference. So in summary, keep trying, watch out for these barriers, and I have no doubt that all of you will be able to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naman, for sharing your story, and it has been really wonderful. And I think, and I'm sure that others would also agree, that it needs a lot of courage to do something which is unconventional, especially risking everything you possess and have access to. So hats off to you. You're living your dream. That's so wonderful. Now, some of our audience, they have questions, and I would appreciate if they can unmute themselves and can ask. So we can start with Vashishta. Vashishta, can you unmute yourself and can ask the question to Naman?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're audible. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so thanks for the wonderful talk. I liked especially barrier 6 and 7. They're so spot on. So the question I had is, I have 2 questions. I don't know if I can ask both. But yeah, so one of them was, you mentioned that policy making in India, like even in the present government, would involve JSS, per se, tribal health. So like, isn't it a good thing that they're involving people who are critical of themselves? So you mentioned it as a bad thing or a good thing? That wasn't clear.
Sorry. Yes, I mentioned it as a good thing, but I think there's many more layers of discussion there. briefly, I would say that even when we say the government or when we talk about an institution is nothing but a collection of individuals, right? So even within the government, there are certain aspects of the government which are very opposed to JSS being part of these committees, and there are certain elements of the government which are supportive and sympathetic, and there's a tension within that. So even the involvement is quite complicated, and sometimes it's done as window dressing to show ha 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 hum baki log ko bulaya tha, but then they're not taken seriously, or they're marginalized and they're done just for show. So involvement has different layers. Even the invitation has different layers. But still, it's certainly a positive thing that's even can be done on occasion and gives an opportunity, for sure.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vashishta. Lajja has also a few questions for you. So, Lajja, are you there? Can you unmute yourself and ask?
Hello. Yes, I'm here. Thank you for the talk. I also had 2 questions. The first was, what's your source of wisdom? I really found your talk very intriguing and really wise. So I just want to know that. And the second question is, how do you balance your work at JSS and the work in US? And what exactly is the work that you do at JSS?
So on your first question, I think if I had an answer to that, I wouldn't actually be very wise. I don't. Again, the disclaimer, and I make it very seriously, is that I'm still figuring this out. This is constantly evolving. I think when we learn lessons in life, and even those lessons, can change and evolve with time. 2 things that have at least helped me is I have been fortunate to come across many people, and I have taken, I think, a deliberate time and effort to pick their brains, right? To ask them questions, to reach out to them, to say, hey, give me an hour of your time. I really, really want to understand your experiences and your mind. And I have learned from others. In science, there's that famous quote of "we stand on the shoulder of giants," which is that even every brilliant scientist, what they did relied on the work of thousands before them. And I have tried to absorb other people's experiences. And what's the harm in asking, right? The most somebody can say is just, "No, sorry, I'm too busy," right? But you'd be surprised how many people say, "Yeah, sure, I would love to." And that has been wonderful in my own life. And the second thing is, I think we can also widen our experiences a lot by reading. And I think reading is a really, really underrated activity. Reading a lot, reading spy novels, reading literature, reading one of the books I've learned the most from is Abraham Verghese, who's another physician writer, his novel Cutting for Stone. Beautiful, beautiful story, but so many lessons for me. History books, reading beyond clinical medicine, I think is just accelerates, again, that experience of others that you take in. Your second question about JSS. So first, I'm not balancing work in the US and here. I am doing only working in India right now. I have moved to India. I own no possessions in India. I have married the love of my life in India. She was a resident at JSS. I have my family and house here. There's no balancing of work. In the years before, it was difficult. When I would come to India, go to the US, year here, year there. It was I think at a personal life level very challenging in terms of not having a base and always being on the move. But when you're young, it's fine. I think anyone can handle it. People deal with far more difficult things. How do I contribute at JSS? Honestly, it's been a dream. I do clinical work, I do research, I'm involved in policy, and I'm involved in teaching. So clinical work, I do whatever needs to be done. For example, if one of the founders who's an OBGYN is gone, I manage the OB department, do the scheduled hysterectomies, deal with complicated labor and delivery patients, prenatal clinic, whatever. If our internist is out, I manage the ICU. If our general surgeon is on leave, I do not do the full range of general surgeries, but I take care of the bread and butter ones and do emergencies. And so being a family physician, one of the nice things is to be able to contribute in a sort of flexible generalist way. Research-wise, I help with resident theses and have a few research projects of my own. We also have a community program that does research and tries to, the philosophy at JSS has always been service learning, that you serve the community, but in doing so, you make a larger impact through what they call force multipliers, which are training, advocacy, and research. You take the lessons from service and training, research, and advocacy, help them have a broader impact. On the policy side, I'm involved in the National COVID Task Force, as well as some national policy committees on malaria, which I did research in for a number of years. And on the training side, we have a family medicine postgraduate program, and I work closely with the residents.
Does it answer your question, Ajay? I think it was very elaborate.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Tony has also something to ask to you. Dr. Tony?
Hi, Naman. So what I wanted to ask you, if you can read in the chat, is that, as you said, one of the major barriers are the normative issues, that if you're at a particular place, in a particular status in life, and in a particular career path, that you're expected to go along a certain way. And when you don't do that, there is the entire issue of family and friends and your mentors and everybody else saying that, "Arey, ye kya kiya tumne?" How did you deal with it when you don't take the path often taken?
I think that's a wonderful question. I don't know. I mean, I do know a little bit. I think some of it goes back to my earlier point I made briefly about risk. Is when you take the path that was not expected to be taken, it is certainly more risk. And it was easier for me to deal with because I came from a background and an upbringing where my psychological risk, my social risk, and my financial risk were less. And that is a privilege, but I hope I'm trying to make the best use of the privilege I was born into. I don't know. I think the other thing that really helped is, again, examples. I do not discount the power of examples. This is why diversity is so important, and it for two things. One is it gives you examples of people who are, and examples are important at two levels, I would say also. At the peer level and at the level of sort of mentors and role models. You need to see people ahead of you who have done similarly, understand why they've done it and where it's taken them. And you need peers to be doing it alongside of you, at least a few, so you don't feel completely alone. Because that sense of isolation and conversely, the sense of solidarity is a huge boost. And finding those examples and mentors and finding those peers is not always easy, because by definition, this is the outlier, and there are a few of them. And a lot of my peer examples were people either who I'd met once at a conference and then stayed in touch with for years over phone calls and emails, or never even met and actually only had a digital connection with them, but it was still so uplifting. And at the institutional level, this is why having diversity in faculty, both from race, gender, from caste, from socioeconomic background, and from interests is so important, because that's what allows individuals to have a wider set of role models and examples to do different things in life, which I ultimately think will be more impactful, more personally meaningful, and better for our society.
Thank you, Naman, for that explanation.
Thanks, Naman, for that.
I think Dr. Pratap is also want to ask something. Pratap sir?
Yeah. Hi, Naman. You must be mentoring some younger people, both at JSS, maybe also you might have done some in US. What is your approach? How do people come to you, and how do you go about taking them on?
Yeah. Thank you. Well, one thing maybe I'll add on also, how have I found my mentors? And one of the best things about writing, I think, is not necessarily that your thoughts are necessarily going to convince people. They may, and if they do, that's wonderful. They sharpen your own thoughts, but also they help link people. Writing and written pieces can serve as a calling card. You can either come across people in life in person, or, for example, I could come across an inspiring editorial that Yogesh Jain wrote, and based on the editorial, I email him wanting to continue the discussion or asking follow-up questions, and that eventually leads to a deeper relationship. I think, and that's how I've found a lot of my mentors. In fact, either I came across them randomly in person, or I came across their writings and then reached out to them. And I think some people have found me that way through some work I've been involved in or some writings. Some people I've met really randomly, some people a friend of a friend. But I think I've always met people who are searching in some way or another. And I don't know if I've mentored enough people to necessarily have an approach. I think I try to keep in mind, sometimes when you're dealing with people who are very young, it's easy to become a cynic. It's easy to be critical. It's easy to say, they're so naive or they're so raw. How do I work with them? Where do I even start? And I don't have an easy answer for that, because at a certain level, if you really have 100 people approaching you, it's not possible. I don't have that problem. But just remembering to be kind. If somebody is taking an initiative, if somebody is taking risk, I try to remind myself that is beautiful, no matter what it is, even when it is misguided. And whatever I do, I should not squash that spirit. I should not discourage. So I'm sorry if that doesn't answer your question. I think I have a better sense of what not to do rather than necessarily an answer of what to do.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Naman, again for that wonderful explanation. Dr. Aditi also has a question for you. Dr. Aditi?
Hi, Naman. Excellent talk. Thank you for those messages. I think these talks are the precise reason why we got started with starting this series. My question to you is that a lot of the time we find ourselves struggling with the urgent. It's not for a lack of a planned day ahead, but for the fact that those tasks that suddenly come up and are urgent. So how do you manage to stay focused on what's important while also dealing with the urgent?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and I think again, I said it before, but I'll say it again. Hats off to AIIMS faculty, because you're faced with a lot of urgencies. So at some level, right? This is my problem also with wellness and well-being. Is a lot of the intentions are good, but often what happens in medicine when we talk about wellness and well-being is we ask people who already are faced with a shortage of time and resource to just try and do more. And you already don't have enough time to do your clinical work, but now you need to take care of yourself. Rather than addressing the systemic institutional aspects of well-being, we make it personal. And at some level, there has to be an institutional response to urgency. And I'll talk about that before I talk about the personal response. And at the institutional level, if you're under-resourced, I mean, if you continue indefinitely working in a very, very under-resourced way, you will burn people out. And there is no shortcut to that. There is no magic fix to that. We can all work hard, we can all be motivated, but you cannot continually, year after year after year, stretch people thin and stress them without there being consequences. At a personal level, on the urgent, I struggle with this as well. I use a few planning techniques. I try to take a step back and think about from time to time what's important. I talk with friends about what I'm working on, and they remind me that, hey, that doesn't seem very important. Why are you devoting so much time and energy to it? So internal checks, external checks. I don't necessarily have a magic system, and I try to keep reading. So this is probably maybe the most useful concrete thing I can give you is I try to read every single day. Is that again, values are skills to be practiced, and the best way of practicing a skill is to do it regularly, even if it's for 5 minutes. So even if I've had the busiest day with a lot of urgent things, try to read for 10 minutes before going to sleep. And reading, especially reading about science history, science philosophy, reorients me towards the urgent. Towards the important, away from the urgent.
Thank you, Dr. Naman. So, do we have any more questions from the audiences?
Hello. I had one more question. Isn't bachelor's in public health an unusual choice? Like, what made you choose that in the first place, which got you into the field?
Hi. Yes. It is. It's a Bachelor of Science, so I don't think it's that different than any other Bachelor of Science. It's unusual in that it's not offered at a lot of universities. I think there's only a handful which offer it. I actually came in the U.S. One of the merits of their education system is that it's very, very flexible. So I actually came in starting out and did a year of biomedical engineering before I switched to public health. Unfortunately, a lot of the first year courses there's some overlap. And I just realized that I enjoyed the intellectual challenge that population level thinking brought. That was really it. The statistics involved, the multidisciplinary approaches involved were just fun. It was wide. It was well suited, I think, to my personality, and I had a few lecturers which were just inspiring. And I said, okay, I want to be like them. Let me learn about this more.
Thank you.
So we have time. We can ask more from Naman. This is a wonderful opportunity to discuss things with him. Hey, Naman, may I ask you one thing? Hello.
Of course, please do. And I just shared my email on the chat, and anyone feel free to reach out to me at any time. So I'm happy to.
Yeah, that's so nice. I was just curious that what was that one thing that made you sell everything at the US and shift your base to India? Was it like craving for your roots, the altruism, the search for something worthwhile, or what?
Yeah. No, thanks. One thing that made a difference to me, one memory I have is the Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs, maybe 10 years ago, held a panel on OCIs, Overseas Citizens of India's, who had returned to India to start a business, returned to India to join the medical profession, returned to India for a variety of things. And in that panel, I remember one person who ran a fellowship program for Indian Americans to come work in India said what I found common in the 200 different fellows who've done the fellowship is that it's not about opportunity, it's not about impact, all of those things may play a role, but his experience was that fundamentally people came back for emotional reasons. There was some emotional connection, some sense of belonging, of rootedness, of seeking meaning, of feeling part of something bigger. That is ultimately what led people to come back. And I think that's probably true for me. I grew up, spending a lot of time with my grandparents, and every single summer I was back in India, 5th and 6th standard. My parents moved me back to India for 2 years, and I studied in a normal school in Ahmedabad, in Gujarat, and so I had the exposure and the sense of belonging, and I think my grandparents were a big influence. My grandfather was a freedom fighter. He was a very principled person. He did a lot of social work. He went to jail during the emergency, and that's, I think, at somewhere deep in my psyche, that left a sense of connection and feeling of responsibility. And then 2, I will admit there's a selfish reason in which that, despite all the material and professional perks of working in the US, which granted there are many, like the institutional environments are just much better. The professionalism is much higher. The type of work you can do, but at the same time, I will say that I am 10 times more professionally satisfied working in India. From a number of levels, and not just on an altruistic level. Yes, you can have 100 times more impact working in India, but even at a personal level, it is much more fun. You get to be so much more creative. When you are working where there are less resources and less precedents, you get to be more creative. You get to work on problems in much more innovative and new ways. And in that sense, like at such a young age, I would never have had the creative opportunities I would have had here that I would have never had them in the US. And that has to do with working in somewhere that's under-resourced. It comes with its own set of challenges and frustrations for sure. But the creativity it enables and just the joy and the fun are also unparalleled. Granted, this is from a position of privilege where I don't have to worry about, my family's well-being or some other concerns that people very legitimately have to be concerned with. Somebody, Pratap, answered, I think, in response to that, any frustrations working here and long-term plans. Many frustrations, all of which you're all well familiar with and have experienced and share, so I don't need to go into them. Long-term plans, I don't know. After my lesson about stories and the trouble of being stuck to a story too much, I try to not make long-term plans. I would like to continue doing challenging, interesting things with good people. Working with a good team is important. The only sense of long-term I have is rather than work at an individual patient level, or rather than, I want to continue patient care for the rest of my life. It keeps you grounded and it's very important to me. But where I see something I can do more uniquely is in the work of institution building. So rather than policy design, how do we design policies to have an impact on X or Y? How do we design an institution so it can discharge policy, whatever that policy might be? And what are the design elements of an institution which make it effective? And that's a lot more economics, political science, organizational theory. And I would like to chip away at that bit by bit.
Thank you again. I'm really moved by your thoughts, the way you work, and then your plans. Really, they're really inspirational. Would you like to give some message to the young physicians, just to kind of figure out that figure out their dreams and how they can achieve it?
If you're able to, and I would strongly encourage this to everyone, is the further along you go, the harder it is, time-wise, mentally, psychologically, opportunity cost-wise to explore. So use this time in your life to explore as much as possible. Explore different specialties, explore different places, meet different people. Just try to explore different readings. Just explore as much as you can. And part of that is taking time off. So, if you, rather than go straight from MBBS to PG, take a year, take 2 years, and try out different things. The best way to explore is you don't need to know exactly what you want to do. You don't need to know that to take a jump and to make a move. Find something good enough and just jump. And that's going to lead to new people, new experiences, new thoughts, and then feel free to change it, after a few months or a year or however long. But if you have the ability to, take the luxury of time, even if it's for a few months or a few years, and explore before going further along your path.
That is again so wonderful, Dr. Naman. So is Dr. Piyush here? Dr. Piyush, would like to listen to you. You want to ask something or give some concluding remarks? Dr. Shalimar, Dr. Pratap, anyone from our undergraduates, do you have any questions? I think Dr. Piyush is not here. So thank you, Naman. It was a wonderful talk and I thoroughly enjoyed it right from the beginning. And I'm still trying to figure out, yes, we do have dreams, but then we don't have that courage. We cannot muster that courage to go offline and in an unconventional way, the way you did. And it's surely a lesson for everyone.
I think the courage is there. I think the courage is there. The fact that you're here, the fact that you're asking these questions, and the fact that you're listening to me, I think there's no deficit of courage.
But then, like you said, that there are barriers. So barriers may be there which we need to overcome. So
yes, the barriers are universal. The barriers we all have.
Again, we require courage to overcome them.
Yes, but more than courage. The courage you have, you're already there. It's the other aspects. And also, even where you are, I think you're clearly making a difference. So that doesn't, maybe there's more differences you want to make, but I think you're selling yourself short from what I can tell.
And then ultimately, your contentment, your happiness is ultimately the thing. Look, whatever you do, ultimate thing is that, does it make you happy? If it makes you happy, then it's worth it. And I think our audience will surely take this message from your talk.
Yeah. And I would add to that, I agree with you. And I would also add to that, happiness and fulfillment. And sometimes they're the same, and sometimes they can also be different. The example I will always use is data about having children. When parents are surveyed, on average, children decrease happiness, but they increase fulfillment and meaning in life.
Yeah, they're related, definitely. So Tony, do you want to add something to it?
No, I'm good. And thanks a lot. It was great hearing you, Naman. I'll connect with you on your email. Thanks.
Sure, happy to.
No more questions? Yes, sir.
I would just want to add that this study on children and happiness was done in more than 70 countries. So it's one of the biggest studies that has been done to date.
That's nice. That's nice. So thank you so much, Naman, for your time, for your energy, for everything. You kind of gave in a kind of nutshell. It's kind of a 1-hour session, and it gave all the essence of the work you have done over the last 14 years. It's really so amazing. From all the organizers, from the undergraduates, on the behalf of the undergraduates, I thank you very much for being with us. It was really nice talking to you. Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you so much. And I will share the slides with the notes. I'll email it to you, and then anyone who wants, you can share it with whoever wants it.
That's so nice of you. So nice of you. And we'll stay in touch. Right? Yes. There's much more to learn, much more we can deliver beyond this 1 hour session. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Best wishes.